Hey everyone, back again. I realize I've never done an episode explaining what the id, the ego, and the superego are from Freud's work and from psychoanalysis, so I'm going to do that for you here. But before jumping into it, hi, I'm David. I explain philosophical concepts and ideas and ways to make them accessible to you. So if you're new here, you can subscribe and see videos released every single week. You can go check out my catalog of hundreds of episodes that you can learn from. You can leave comments and we can learn from you. It would be amazing. Can you imagine? If you found me on YouTube, you're going to be able to find this as a podcast and they're all the same names. There's also links in the description if you're interested in that. If you found this as a podcast, you're going to be able to find the video on YouTube if you're into that. If you want to follow me anywhere else, you can find me on Instagram, TikTok, links for all such things in the description. And if you want to help me out, do all those things I just mentioned, like, share, subscribe. You can help me out monetarily via Patreon or PayPal, but no pressure to do that. And let's jump into explaining what the id, ego, and the superego are. So this week, Saturday, there'll be an episode on Freud's book on the id and the ego. And if, tune in for that if you want a more developed discussion than what I'm going to provide for you here. But just, it's important to know what these terms are. So here's a little bit of an intro. Now, Freud, in all of Freud's work, really what we find is an effort to understand the tension and the harmony between the unconscious and the conscious. So within each one of us is a tension between what we express outwardly in the world and what we keep hidden away deep down inside of us. Now, not all of those things that are deep down inside of us are necessarily available to us. We have many drives and desires that we aren't even aware of. And it is the psychoanalyst's job to help make them apparent to us, to reveal them to us. So in order to try and understand the dynamic between the conscious and the unconscious, Freud offers us some key terms to further distinguish these different zones, where he suggests that the unconscious is the id. And the id refers to all of those drives that are buried away deep within us that we aren't really allowed to bring out, or that we are unable to bring out. And we might not be allowed to bring them out because there are forces in society that disallow us from embracing them, from really expressing them. Now he suggests that in addition to the id, there's what is called the ego. And the ego is the part of us that mediates our relationship, or our id's relationship, our unconsciousness's relationship with the external world, where the ego is privy to all of the rules out there, all the rules in the world, everything that we are allowed to do, what we want to do, that we can be aware of in our mind. And the ego mediates what from the unconscious, what from the id can come out and can really express itself in the world. And it helps to regulate our mental processes, allows us to have a meaningful relationship with our own drives and desires while still allowing us to exist in the world as a human that's not just running rampant, doing whatever they want. Now, additionally, there is the superego. And the superego is the more clear expression of what we are in our identity. Now, this demands a lot of nuance if we actually read Freud's work. And the reason for that is that these three terms are all connected. The superego, that which really resonates with or characterizes our outward expression of our identity, is not just a free demonstration of what we want to be. The superego is actually formed in our childhood by experiencing repression, by experiencing authority. So in childhood, because in Freud this goes down patriarchal lines, the father figure helps a young child develop their superego, because the father figure becomes what Freud calls an ego ideal. They are the person that regulates what we can or cannot do. And the reason they are the ego ideal, they are the ideal form of that regulating function that our ego is because they have attained what every young boy secretly wants for Freud, and that is to develop a sexual relationship with their mother. This is the crux of the Oedipus complex. And because the father has managed to attain that love of their mother, they then become this figure that the young boy comes to identify with and wants to become. And so they frame, not like consciously, but they come to frame their identity around this identification with their father. Now, in the case of young girls, it's kind of the other way around. They come to identify with the father, but find they can't actually become that. And this is really the sexist core of Freud's work. Of course, there's a lot to unpack here, but we're being somewhat brief. And they instead come to embrace the identity of the mother at the end of the day, which is super problematic, of course. We'd be very clear about this. Sexism is at the core of this theory. We cannot deny that. We cannot ignore it either. We have to always keep this right at the front of our minds if we talk about this theory. It's not as though we can just forget that it's there. So what he suggests is that the superego is then formed. That is, our sense of ourself and our identity out in the world is not just like free-floating demonstration of all our drives and wants. It is an embracement of an authoritative idea about what it actually means to exist in the world. It has a connection to our wants and needs, but those wants and needs that have been permitted by the authoritative figures that occupy our world and that we have a relationship with. So we have to think about the id, the ego, and the superego as a kind of triangle, or maybe like a Mobius strip, or like an Ouroboros of, the snake eating its own tail, where they all come back around, where the id is regulated by the ego, which then can permit some expression into the form of a superego, but that superego is like an ultimate demonstration of the power of authoritative control and repression that we develop in childhood, that is really almost an extension of our ego, but it is the outward form, what has been permitted, and that this connects with the id, because the id the id is where these drives and desires come from, even if they have emerged through repression from being a child in proximity to parental figures that control and shape what we are allowed to do in the world. So the id resonates with or characterizes all of those unconscious drives and desires that society either permits or doesn't permit, or that the authoritative figures in our lives permit or dispermit. The ego regulates our relationship with, or our unconsciousness's relationship with the external world, what it is actually allowed to express. And the superego is that expression of the id, what can finally come out as it has been regulated and controlled, determined by these authoritative figures. And it is the psychoanalyst's responsibility to develop the harmony between these three parts of who we are, and to try and make sure that you can optimize what drives you can express out in the world and do so in a way that makes sense to you, while also identifying those forces out in the world that unjustly repress or control what you are allowed to express and do. So this is like the psychoanalyst's role in all of this. But yeah, this is kind of a short introduction to these terms. I'd love to know what you think. There's a lot more to it than that. If there's anything that you're like, David, you idiot, you had to mention this, leave a comment. I can pin it. Everyone will see. Maybe I got something wrong. You could say it. I can pin it. We can all laugh at me. Wouldn't that be fun? That would be so fun. If you like what I did, like, share, subscribe, tell your friends. Who knows, they might get a kick out of it. And yeah, stay tuned for Saturday for more on this topic, and every other Saturday for more philosophy stuff. On that note, take care.